Deep in the fog-choked hollows of Appalachia, there are towns that still exist on old county maps, but not on any map you can drive to today. Coal camps that house thousands of families. Company stores still stocked with rusted cans. Church pews still set for a Sunday service that never happened. And in at least 8 of these settlements, the people didn't leave slowly. They vanished, in a single night, sometimes in a single hour, leaving dinner on the table and boots by the door. No mass grave, no evacuation record, just silence. Tonight, we're going into the mountains to find out why. Number 1, the mountains that keep secrets. Appalachia doesn't give up its dead easily. This mountain range stretches for nearly 2,000 miles, cutting through West Virginia, Kentucky, Virginia, and Tennessee. And for over a century, it was the beating heart of America's coal industry. Wherever there was a rich coal seam, a company would move in fast, sometimes within weeks, and build an entire town from nothing. These were called coal camps or company towns, and at their peak, some housed 5, 6, even 10,000 people. The company owned everything: the houses, the school, the church, the general store, even the currency, in the form of scrip, a private coin that could only be spent in the company's own shop. Workers were paid in scrip, so they were, in a very real sense, trapped. You couldn't just pack up and leave when the money you earned wasn't real money anywhere else. This total control is important because it means these towns left behind incredibly detailed paperwork, payroll ledgers, church attendance logs, store inventories. And that's exactly why the disappearances are so unsettling. We don't just have vague rumors. We have hard records that stop, mid-sentence, on a specific date, and then nothing. Historians studying these abandoned camps have identified at least 8 settlements where the population didn't decline gradually as the coal ran out, the way most ghost towns die. Instead, the record shows something closer to a mass exodus, compressed into a single night. Company logs show a full shift clocked in. Then the next day's log is blank forever. So what actually happened? Some explanations are mundane: disasters, disease, corporate collapse. Others are stranger and harder to explain with a company ledger. Let's go camp by. Number 2, the camps where the records stop mid-sentence. The first pattern investigators noticed was in payroll books. In a normal declining coal town, you'd see the workforce shrink over months or years as the seam played out. 50 fewer names one month, 30 fewer the next. But in several of these 8 settlements, the payroll book shows a completely full shift roster on one page, and the following page is either torn out, left blank, or simply never continued. In one Kentucky camp, the company store's daily sales ledger, which had been filled in every single day for 11 straight years without a gap, stops after a Tuesday entry recording routine purchases of flour, tobacco, and boot leather. There is no Wednesday entry, ever again. Local county tax assessors in that same district noted something else strange. Property assessments for the following year list the homes as occupied because no one had filed a change of status. Bureaucratically, on paper, those families still lived there for years after the town was empty. A second camp, this one straddling the Virginia-West Virginia line, has a preserved logbook from its one-room schoolhouse. The teacher recorded daily attendance. On the final page, 22 children are marked present. There is no entry for absence, no note of illness, no announcement of a closure. The next page is simply the start of a new and used school year that was never filled in. What makes camps like these different from an ordinary ghost town is the absence of a wind down. There's no gradual thinning of the population that you'd expect from a played-out mine. or a slow economic decline. It's a hard stop. Number 3, the disaster theory, and why it doesn't explain everything. The most obvious explanation for a coal camp emptying overnight is disaster, and Appalachia had plenty of those. Mine explosions from methane gas buildup, sudden flooding of shafts, and cave-ins were tragically common in the early 20th century, sometimes killing dozens of miners in a single incident. But here's the problem. A mine disaster kills the miners underground. It doesn't explain why the miners' wives, children, elderly parents, shopkeepers, and preachers would also disappear the same night, from houses far from the mine entrance. Disaster explains death. It doesn't explain absence. Some researchers point to disease instead, and there is precedent. During the 1918 influenza pandemic, entire camps were hit hard, and in isolated hollow communities with only one doctor for thousands of people, death tolls could be catastrophic within days. It's plausible that an outbreak could empty a town's storefronts and schoolhouse quickly. Yet disease still leaves a trace. Burial records, coffin orders from the company's store, a spike in the local undertaker's ledger. In several of these 8 vanished camps, there is no corresponding surge in burials recorded anywhere nearby. If people died, where were they buried? If they didn't die, where did they go? A third mundane theory is corporate abandonment. A coal company going bankrupt overnight and simply cutting off wages, forcing residents to flee before starvation. This happened more than once in Appalachian history. But bankruptcy usually leaves a very loud paper trail. Lawsuits, unpaid supplier invoices, worker complaints filed with the state. In the strangest of these 8 cases, the company itself continued filing paperwork and paying property taxes for years after the town was already empty, as if, on paper, nobody at the corporate office had noticed anything was wrong either. Number 4, the camps with no rational explanation. This is where the story stops fitting neatly into disaster or bankruptcy and starts drifting into something the miners themselves apparently believed. Appalachian mining culture had a rich, deeply held set of superstitions passed down through generations of miners, many originally brought over by Welsh, Scottish, and Eastern European immigrant laborers who worked the same seams. Central to almost all of it was the belief in the atomic knocker, a small, mischievous spirit said to live inside the mountain itself, knocking on support beams before a collapse. Miners treated these warnings as real safety signals, not folklore, and many crews would refuse to enter a shaft after hearing knocking sounds, regardless of what a company foreman said. In at least 2 of these vanished camps, oral histories collected decades later from descendants who had moved away before the disappearance describe a period of days where miners reported unusually persistent knocking from deep in the shaft, knocking with no clear source, occurring even in freshly opened sections of the mine with no unstable rock. Crews reportedly refused to work. Some accounts describe families packing hastily and leaving in the following days, not because of an order from the company, but because the community itself had decided the mountain was warning them. Whether you take this as literal supernatural warning, a folk memory of gas leaks the men could sense but not name, or simply community panic feeding on itself, the effect on the historical record is the same. Coordinated, rapid abandonment, without a single centralized disaster to explain it. A separate and frankly stranger pattern appears in a camp in the Kentucky mountains, where several surviving letters, preserved by a descendant family and later donated to a regional historical society, describe a specific final night. Residents wrote of a strange, prolonged silence that fell over the hollow just before dusk. No insects, no birds, no wind. Several letters, written independently by different households, use almost the same words to describe it. Whether this was a real atmospheric phenomenon tied to an approaching storm or shifting air pressure from a mine venting gas, or something residents simply couldn't explain, we can't say for certain. But it was clearly common enough and unsettling enough that multiple families wrote it down the same way. Number 5. What the ruins tell us today. Modern visitors and historical preservationists who've documented these sites describe something eerier than typical decay. In a standard abandoned town, buildings collapse from neglect over decades. Roofs cave slowly, wood rots. Nature reclaims the land gradually. But several of these 8 camps show what preservationists call frozen occupancy. Interiors that look like people meant to come back the next day. Kitchen tables still set. Company store shelves still stocked with canned goods, later found essentially fossilized in place. Children's shoes left by the door. Church hymnals left open on the pew, as if the sermon had simply been interrupted, not canceled. This detail matters because it rules out a slow, planned departure. When families move out on purpose, even in a hurry, even fleeing debt, they take their shoes. They take the cash box. They take the family photos. In these frozen camps, personal belongings of real emotional and practical value were simply left behind, exactly where they were being used, as if the interruption came without warning and without a clear return plan. Local surveyors who mapped several of these sites in the mid to late 20th century also noted the absence of anything resembling a mass grave, a fire scar consistent with a structure fire, or physical trauma to the buildings that would suggest violence or explosion damage in the town itself, as opposed to underground in the mine. The town, structurally, looks fine. It's just empty. Number 6. The pattern across all 8. Step back far enough, and a pattern starts to emerge across these 8 settlements, scattered across 4 different states and built by different mining companies decades apart from one another. First, the disappearance is fast, usually within a single night or a few days at most, not a gradual decline. Second, the paperwork stops abruptly rather than tapering off, suggesting no one involved expected the town to actually close. Third, personal belongings of real value are left behind, ruling out a calm, planned relocation. Fourth, there is no corresponding spike in burial records, injury reports, or violence, which argues against both a hidden massacre and a straightforward disaster killing everyone. Fifth, in the cases with the best preserved oral histories, residents themselves describe a specific, shared warning sign. Unusual sounds from the mountain, an unnatural silence, a collective unease that preceded the departure. None of this proves anything supernatural. It's entirely possible each of these 8 camps has its own mundane explanation we simply don't have complete records for. An unrecorded methane leak, a fast-moving illness the company covered up to avoid liability, a bankruptcy so sudden the workers were simply never paid and fled quietly to avoid starvation, with records lost to time rather than deliberately withheld. But taken together, the pattern is consistent enough across geographically separate towns with no connection to one another that it's easy to understand why local legend filled in the gaps the historical record left open. When a community vanishes overnight and leaves its dinner on the table, the silence itself becomes the story. Appalachia holds hundreds of abandoned coal camps, but only a handful vanished like this, overnight, completely, without a clean explanation. Maybe one day new records surface and solve it. Until then, the mountains keep their secret. If you want part 2, covering 3 more forgotten camps, let us know in the comments below.